Hi, I'm a law professor. My name is Steve Gonzales, and I teach U.S. constitutional law and also teach Indigenous rights and some other areas at Phoenix School of Law in Phoenix, Arizona. And I'm here in connection with the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues.
Great. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the forum?
The forum is probably unique within the UN history. The as most people know, the United Nations is basically a club of different nations around the world that recognize each other. But the indigenous nations are not generally recognized by nations as having their own nation state. They're more or less peoples that were forgotten about within the various countries. So because of that, they've never really had a clear voice within the UN community, within the world community. So it's fairly new. It's only about 7 years old that the United Nations General Assembly voted to establish the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues. And it brings together leaders from nations, both delegations from member states, from Indian nations and North America, First Nations in Canada, but also from all over Africa and Asia and South America, to try and give voice to the needs of the indigenous peoples of all the continents.
How is the character of this forum different than other UN gatherings, meetings, commissions?
Well, this is, I think, my 5th time here, and at the forum, probably the 4th time. I've been at some other UN meetings too for the Baha'i international community. And the one thing that I've observed that I really like about the Permanent Forum is that it's somewhat less competitive. The delegates and the representatives of the NGOs are really trying to work together towards development. And they start out, for example, the programs, usually on the first day, by thanking the original inhabitants of the land. Here in New York, of course, it's American Indians. So that's a uniqueness that you find actually with indigenous cultures around the world. And they also will hold hands and begin with a prayer of thanksgiving to God. They will also often wear the clothing, traditional clothing from all the various cultures that they represent. So it's a beautiful collection of people, a lot of smiling faces, a lot more, I think, of unity and a little less competitive, or there isn't the tendency toward alliances and shifting issues, economic issues and the like, that you see at sometimes at other gatherings.
What is your role as a delegate? What has that been like during the forum?
Well, it's very exciting. I get a chance to meet representatives and delegations from all over the world, and I mean places that I certainly never heard of. I had no idea places like Taiwan, show my ignorance here, had a indigenous population that was not Chinese, but is still extant up in the mountains. So I had opportunity to meet the king of that particular nation. Indigenous peoples from Okinawa, from New Zealand, the Maori, and these people are committed. They're focused. They're absolutely concerned about their communities, their children. Another issue that they are very, very concerned about is just the health of the globe. Indigenous peoples tend to be very close to the global climate changes, to the food issues, food and clean water. So they are naturally concerned about that. So it's a very exciting and I think noble cause that they pursue.
As a Baha'i, how are you participating specifically as a delegate from the Baha'i international community?
Well, my role basically is to learn, to try and help assist in the development of resolutions and of some of the thought processes that are going on within the UN, to try and help shape the language, to find any way I can to advance whatever there is. For example, being a law professor, I might help with suggestions on how to draft language that will be, for example, in the United States, constitutionally acceptable, or that would be in conformity with other United Nations conventions and accords and treaties, and to strategize to find best ways to advance the cause of development of indigenous peoples, basically to affect the thought process.
Okay, great. And how has the forum changed, the discourses within the forum changed since the UN Declaration of Rights for Indigenous Peoples ratification in 2007?
That's an excellent question. For many years, the focus of the Permanent Forum has been on the Declaration of Indigenous Rights, which was passed in late 2007. Since that time, the shift has been away from just pushing on one document toward finding ways of implementing the provisions of the document. Well, that's very exciting because the document is so comprehensive. It applies to everything from clean water and food, to labor, to freedom of faith, to economic development, to every endeavor of life, to raising children, all of those things. Many of these issues, of course, are of deep concern to the Baha'i international community. We want to see not only the Baha'i community advance, but all of humanity on the globe move toward development in a healthy way. And so it's very easy to feel at home talking about these issues at the United Nations. And again, it's less of a political development. It's not so much that we have to get countries to align and to find one to agree with the other and all of that's going on. It's more of a pure talk about how can we develop, how can we improve food without ruining the environment, how can we clean water without completely destroying economy and jobs, all of that. There's a real sincerity among the delegates.
And what is the hoped outcome for the forum? When it's done, is there a text that's being worked on, or?
There's a number of documents, and each forum has different themes. This forum in 2009 is focusing partly on the rights of women, also on the Arctic peoples, and to some extent on human rights, which is always an issue. So there will be documents. They're usually posted on the UN website. There'll be resolutions. Some will be taken to the General Assembly and be pursued there. It just depends what's hammered out. But those at least are the themes of this particular year's forum.
And personally, what would you like to see as an outcome at this forum?
Well, I think they're doing the right thing, so it's more of the same. I'd love to see the forum begin to have more of a role within the United Nations system. Of course, the United Nations is as I mentioned earlier, all the nations that recognize each other. But there's so much more to that. There's all of the interagency groups that do so much for the World Health Organization, UNICEF, UNIFEM, all of these organizations. And as it turns out, a lot of the suffering of humanity today is among indigenous peoples and minorities. If you look at the serious issues of migration and refugees throughout, for example, Europe and North America, a big percentage, if not the overwhelming majority, of those issues relate to indigenous peoples. Employment, the world economic crisis, which has affected the West, I think, as dramatically as the fall of the Berlin Wall in the East 20 years ago. Now we're having the kind of the fall of an economic wall here in the West, and that's affected people involved in indigenous nations, I should say, much harder. Foreclosures on homes, loss of jobs, all of that has a disparate impact on these populations. So it's altogether really necessary that we begin to see that it's not just that some parts of the population are hit much harder. Even disease, for example, can spread through these populations much faster because they don't have the health care. And that affects everybody because a virus doesn't stop at the village door. It goes to Wall Street. It goes everywhere.
Okay. Thank you so much for sitting down and talking with us.
Oh, it was a pleasure. Thank you.